Top of the Hill, Learning to Think and Grow Rich at Napoleon Hill High School by Jim Stovall. Narrated by Kevin Clay. Chapter 1. Trouble in Paradise. Opportunity often comes disguised in the form of misfortune or temporary defeat. Napoleon Hill. 1. Autumn came gently to the mountains of Virginia that particular year. The changing of the seasons can best be observed by someone who is in the same place at the same time each day. Philip Madison was just such a person, as he could be found daily at 6 a.m., dutifully plodding through his 3-mile jog. Philip Madison was not one of those joyous, exuberant runners one confronts from time to time, but he was more of a dutiful, dogged, and persistent jogger who was more interested in the results than the exercise itself. Philip preferred having jogged to jogging. Every morning at 5:45, the persistent, ever-vigilant alarm clock interrupted Philip Madison's slumber. He quietly dressed in his running gear and crept out of the house so as not to awaken the rest of the family. After a few quick obligatory stretches, he plodded down the driveway and turned onto the country road in front of his house. It was the first week of September, so the daylight was coming a bit later each morning. The false dawn was just beginning to chase away the darkness from the forested mountains of rural Virginia. Eventually, Philip slipped into a steady pace, found his stride, and began to breathe comfortably. While he couldn't point to any evidence to prove it, Philip Madison was convinced that the hills were getting steeper along his 3-mile jogging course with each passing year. In his mind, the new year was marked annually not by the changing of the calendar on January 1st, but by the beginning of the new school year each fall. Philip Madison was known as Principal Madison at Napoleon Hill High School in rural Wise County, Virginia. Napoleon Hill High School represented more than Philip Madison's job or profession. It comprised the totality of his life. The first time young Phil Madison had darkened the door of the school, he was a scrawny, timid freshman who felt as if he was the proverbial stranger in a strange land. Over the next 4 years, he distinguished himself academically and, to a lesser extent, athletically, as a Napoleon Hill High warrior. After graduating from the teachers' college in the area, Philip Madison found himself back at Napoleon Hill High School as an English teacher. After a decade of guiding young minds through the writings of Shakespeare, Twain, and Napoleon Hill himself, Philip Madison was appointed the new principal of his alma mater. The years had flown by, and as he jogged toward the halfway point of his morning ritual, he was painfully aware of the fact that he was closing in on a half-century of life. It seemed somehow fitting that exactly 1.5 miles from Philip Madison's house, at the precise halfway point in his daily jog, the historical marker commemorating the life and legacy of Napoleon Hill had been erected. The historical marker had been the brainchild and pet project of Don Green, the executive director of the Napoleon Hill Foundation. Mr. Green was a retired bank president who brought his energy and many years of experience to the foundation, whose mission was to build on the life's work and growing legacy of Napoleon Hill. Each year, the Foundation's work culminated as people came from across the country and around the world to celebrate the annual Napoleon Hill Day at the local campus of the University of Virginia. Philip Madison made sure that every student at the high school got to experience the festivities and hear the speakers who gathered for Napoleon Hill Day each year. As he reached out and touched the smooth, solid surface of the marker, Philip felt as if he had renewed his daily connection with Napoleon Hill. The marker gave a thumbnail sketch of Napoleon Hill's life, but it didn't begin to tell the whole story. Philip knew the words inscribed on the marker by heart. Napoleon Hill was born nearby on 26 October 1883. At age 13, he became a mountain reporter for small-town newspapers. He left Southwest Virginia in 1908 to write magazine profiles of such business leaders as Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, and Thomas Edison. Hill virtually invented the gospel of personal achievement by distilling their principles of financial success into several motivational books. He published Think and Grow Rich, the century's most popular such book, in 1937. Hill lectured widely and served as an advisor to Presidents Woodrow Wilson and Franklin D. Roosevelt. He died in Greenville, South Carolina, on 7 November 1970. As Philip Madison left the historical marker behind, he knew that every step he jogged brought him closer to home. He was convinced that this spot in the mountains of Virginia had to be the most beautiful place on earth. He had not traveled extensively, but he had never found any place that compared to this familiar slice of paradise. The simple life he led in the countryside of Virginia seemed more rich and full as he vicariously experienced the whole world through the careers and lives of his former students he stayed in touch with. As was his daily habit, he paused to catch his breath at the top of the hill near his home. From this vantage point, Philip Madison could see the valley stretched out before him. This rural community had been blessed with rugged beauty and natural resources, but a downturn in the economy and a depressed coal industry weighed heavily on everyone who lived in the area. The morning light was brightening, so Philip could just catch a glimpse of the spot where the Napoleon Hill historical marker was located in the distance. He thought of Hill's early life in these same mountains, where as a young man he had labored in one of the coal mines. Eventually, young Napoleon Hill settled into the life of a laborer. He worked for an area farmer for $1 a day and was convinced this would be his lot in life, until the wise old farmer uttered the words that changed Napoleon Hill's life, and in turn, changed the rest of the world. The farmer confronted young Napoleon Hill, saying, "You are a bright boy. What a pity you are not in school, instead of at work as a laborer at $1 a day." Napoleon Hill would remember that fateful moment and those powerful words for the rest of his life, saying, "That remark aroused in me the first ambition I had ever felt, and incidentally, it is directly responsible for the personal analysis system that I have worked out. No one had ever hinted to me before that I was bright. I had always imagined I was exceedingly dull. In fact, I had been told that I was a dunce. As a boy, I was defeated in everything I undertook, largely because those with whom I associated ridiculed me and discouraged me from engaging in the things that interested me most. My work was selected for me, my studies were selected for me, and my play, well, I was taught that play was a waste of time. With this first-hand knowledge of the great handicap under which the average person starts out in life as a working basis, I began, many years ago, to work out a system for helping people find themselves as early in life as possible. My efforts have yielded splendid returns, for I have helped many find the work for which they were most suited, and I have started them on the road to happiness and success. I have helped more than a few to acquire the qualities for success." Philip Madison hoped and prayed that he could somehow be in the right place at the right time with each of his students to say the words that would open their hearts and minds to the possibilities that exist in the world, in much the same way that the farmer who tilled the very soil in the valley below planted a seed in the mind of a young, impressionable Napoleon Hill. As Philip Madison turned and gazed at a distant mountain across the valley, he could see the sun's morning rays illuminating Napoleon Hill High School, perched on a plateau partway up the mountain slope. From his unique perspective, he could view the school as a focal point for every phase of his life. Whether it was little Phil Madison, freshman student, Mr. Madison, the English teacher, or Principal Madison, the anchor of Napoleon Hill High School had always been there for him. He took pride in the responsibility entrusted to him to educate the young people of the area. In the coming days, he would learn that sometimes in the midst of educating students, the students can educate their teacher or even their principal.